and welcome to Affected, a podcast from Meet. For those of you who don't know Meet, we are a global life sciences talent provider. We've been connecting the industry for over a decade, and now we want to share some of our insights and experiences with you. We'll be hosting monthly episodes, sharing thoughts from our leaders and industry professionals about job hunting and hiring in life sciences, as well as giving our network a platform to share their own experiences of building successful careers in an industry that affects us all.
Hey, and welcome to, I feel like I say this a lot now, a very special edition of the Affected podcast. We've been on what feels like an American tour for this entire season. Was down in Philadelphia last week, and now we're in New York in the IndieBio building, which is an amazing space. So thank you so much for having us here. And I'm joined by the amazing Dr. Sabriya Stukes, who is the CSO at IndieBio. And again, just thank you so much for taking the time out of, I know what for you is an incredibly busy period. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. And despite September and the beginning of October being really busy, this is exactly the kind of thing and organizations we like to be working with. Before we started rolling, I was just chatting about how, we had just kind of brought on our newest cohort of founders. We had Climate Week here. We also had a contingent of Puerto Rican founders and leadership in the space. So really, when this space was imagined and then created, it really was to be a hub of life science and biotech entrepreneurship.
Amazing. Before we get into IndieBio and the amazing work you do here and sort of the hub that you've cultivated over the past however many years, I'd love to delve in a little bit more into your journey, how you ended up in life sciences, sort of how we got to IndieBio now. So it'd be amazing to hear about why life sciences, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm always like, how long do we have? Because I don't really want to prattle on too much about it. But I think for me, it really, I think like so many people who were really just interested in understanding the world around them, that's kind of what got me started on this kind of scientific journey. And I was actually quite young. Maybe to even give a little bit more context, my dad was the assistant superintendent for Arlington County Schools. So I'm originally from Arlington, Virginia. My mom was a physician's assistant. So really growing up, while I didn't sort of understand kind of like, I never was like, this is exactly what I'm going to be when I grow up, but I kind of saw my mom, in a medical profession. I saw my dad in an education space. And I think that probably subconsciously impacted what I gravitated towards in school, but really science was something that I was always quite interested in, probably because of my teachers, probably because of what we were learning. But if you kind of look at other interviews I've done and things I've written, what I always kind of earmark as a point of like, oh, maybe science as a space is something that I kind of want to move towards or kind of have as a North Star. Was I read this book called The Hot Zone, which is about the Ebola outbreak, and I essentially was like, okay, so what you're saying is that there are these very tiny microorganisms that can wreak havoc on complex systems or immune systems like ours. And I found that really fascinating. And so that was just kind of always the big picture question of, okay, well, what actually does happen to our immune systems when we encounter things that we've never seen before, especially microorganisms. And so, when I was in high school, I was really interested in science. When I went to college, I majored in biology, again, still with this sort of fuzzy understanding of like, what do I do with this educational training, like once I'm out in the real world. And like so many, I was like, okay, well, medical school, that's like what everyone kind of does with this training. And when I graduated college, I got my degree in microbiology and immunology with a focus on infectious diseases. I had the opportunity to work at the National Institute of Health, which at the time I was 21 or 22. I was like, this is it. This is the dream job. I was able to work in a research lab that was looking at HIV. Yeah. So, I was doing the thing. I was like zipping up in, like the Tyvek suit. I was like putting on the oxygen pack. I was like walking into, the antechamber. And I did that for a year, and I was like, maybe this isn't, how I want to be doing science.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I, really appreciated science. I really loved working in a lab, but working in a, like a BSL-3 facility when you're 22 is, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I'd been hearing more about PhD programs. I'd been hearing more about other things, you could be doing with a scientific background. And so I had the opportunity to move to New York. I remember very distinctly my one suitcase and train ticket, and my dad, driving me to Union Station and being like, "Are you sure about this?" And I was like, "No," but I'm going to do it anyway. And that was 18 years ago. So I feel like it's kind of worked out, I think.
Yeah.
But in any event, when I got to New York, I again was able to find some work at NYU, their medical school, doing tuberculosis research. So again, I just think all along the way, this sort of North Star question of really wanting to understand, how the world worked around me, as it related to infectious diseases. I went to grad school here at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. Again, maybe suffice to say, science has always been the kind of, both the North Star and the through line of all the decisions I've been making as it relates to kind of my professional journey.
I find it so interesting. I've had the pleasure now of speaking to an awful lot of incredibly intelligent human beings on this podcast, and it does feel that sort of that journey is never one of just like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go achieve this thing. It is very much sort of like, okay, I thought I knew what I wanted to be. It wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But it is that driver of okay, for you it was science. I spoke to a chap on last week, and for him it was just like, how can I best change the world in my own very small way? It's always, I think the greatest thing about life sciences is the people in it aren't here on accident. They're there because they want to.
Well, and I don't know that I even had that high of an aspiration of changing the world, frankly. And maybe it was a bit more selfish, which was, I just wanted to learn.
Yeah.
I know that sounds probably very basic, but I mean, really, one of the reasons I went to grad school, I was like, I'm sorry, you're telling me the government is going to pay me a stipend to continue to learn, to kind of dig deeper, go deeper into a subject that I am, at this point, endlessly fascinated by. Yes, sign me up.
Yeah, how quickly can I put pen to paper?
And I think one of the things that was a challenge for maybe my parents was, and myself too, towards the end of to your point, well, what's the next step? What do I do with this education? And again, for me, it really was the education.
Yeah.
That was the goal. So even, as I mentioned before, even when I was starting, I was like, well, kind of the only thing I knew was, okay, I suppose you work at a hospital, or I suppose you are a nurse or a PA or a doctor, and this is doing research for a living, getting a PhD, having your own research lab, were things that I just was not aware of.
Yeah.
And even actually when I became aware of them, I still was like, that is an interesting opportunity. I don't know that that is kind of what I want to do with my degree. And I think that one of the things that I've at least tried, I don't know if I've always succeeded in it, but I've tried to think about or frame some of the choices that I've made about these next steps in my professional journey are like experiments, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know about a thing, but I'm interested in it, so I'm going to try it. I'm going to learn some things about it, and that's going to then inform my next decision.
Amazing. I'd love to talk about IndieBio and the work you guys do here. It feels as if you're building a platform for people to come and enter life sciences and sort of help them sort of springboard onto huge things. Could you tell me about sort of IndieBio top line level, and then sort of break it down into sort of what the application of that looks like?
Yeah, so IndieBio is a program of the global fund SOSV, which stands for Sean O'Sullivan Ventures. So we are a fund. We invest at the earliest stage of company creation. We like to say we are the first check in deep tech, so we want to be among the first pool of capital that kind of gets these companies off the ground. And the way that the fund does that is through these dedicated programs. So IndieBio really focuses on companies that have more of a molecular, biological, scientific component to it. And then we have a separate program called HACS, which really focuses and supports companies that are working in the energy, hard tech, or robotic space.
Yeah.
And through both of these programs, that supports our overall investment thesis of human and planetary health. So think everything from therapeutics to biomaterials to consumer biology to devices, diagnostics, like I said, robotics, quantum.
Yeah.
It can really run the gamut. And when I was first offered this job, I was like, I don't know, venture capital? I have a science background.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll touch on this tomorrow during the seminar, but I was very wary of the venture capital space. After I'd gone through grad school, I actually spent some time in higher education administration helping to build a master's program around medical technology commercialization. So essentially, how can we train scientists and engineers to think more broadly about the tools and technologies they're building? And when I say more broadly, what I mean is, or at least the way that we did it for this program was, how do you involve the people who are going to be either buying the technology or using the technology or being impacted in the technology in the design?
So how best to sort of like package and take to market, or more?
Even so thinking about your IP strategy, thinking about your business model, but also thinking about, as you are building and designing a technology and a tool, how are you essentially doing customer feedback is what we would call it now. And it was really this idea that at every step along the way, you really do need to keep your customer in mind, or the person who will ultimately be impacted by your technology. Because I think what we do a very good job at, or at least to some extent, is training scientists and engineers in the process.
Yeah.
Kind of, this is how you do the thing to get to the thing. But then when you're building something that will be used by millions of people, or only used by some people that will then have an impact on a lot of other people, you should be taking into consideration their feedback, their how are they going to be able to use the technology. So I only give that context to then say, when I spoke with some of the people who were working at SOSV and IndieBio, one of the things that I think I really gravitated towards was this idea of, yes, we are a venture capital fund, but we work so closely with the founders at the earliest stage to help them figure out how to not only de-risk the biological component of their technology, but also to really kind of think more broadly about, how do you build a company around this? And so I felt like my skill set, even though I don't have a financial background, could really be applicable to that. The other thing that I was really excited about when I joined was, I think, New York. So IndieBio as a program started in 2013 in San Francisco to much success. And I think that New York had been kind of figuring out how to make New York a hub for biotech.
Yes.
As I've shared, I've been in the city now for 18 years. So when I was in grad school, there was very little discussion about biotech entrepreneurship. There was very little discussion about spinning out companies. And again, that was okay for me because a lot of my research was really basic science research, right? But that said, there were many people who really needed that training or really interested in understanding, how you build companies around science. And so I think, at the highest level, both on the city and the state level, New York really wanted or needed something to kind of bring it all together. So, they kind of did a little bit of landscape research, and they said, IndieBio in San Francisco has done such a good job of, not just spinning out companies, but really kind of creating this ecosystem and this environment that supports entrepreneurship. And it would be great if something like that was in New York, especially to help these companies at the earliest stage. So 2025 is when an IndieBio New York team started. I didn't join until about 3 years ago, and the space itself has only been around for about 2 years. So again, sorry for all the context in the background,
No.
But I hope that what that shows or gives the audience is this understanding of what was going on at the time for biotech entrepreneurship, how needed a program and a fund like IndieBio and SOSV was to the New York ecosystem. And when I joined, I really felt like, given the connectivity I had in New York, given this work that I'd done both in the lab and both at the academic level, that I had something to give to help build, not just this ecosystem, but really helping individual companies, kind of at the earliest stage of their journey.
Amazing. And we were talking earlier about sort of how this has become kind of a hub and a platform for companies coming in. One of the reasons we're here is tomorrow we're hosting our diversity and leadership event. For us, sort of lowering the barrier of entries for underrepresented groups in life sciences has been a massive talking point, and when we consider our events, we consider sort of the movements we make within our marketing decisions. It's how do we best amplify voices that may not have the amplification? How do we sort of take steps to better equity? I'd just like to talk, maybe if you could speak a little bit about sort of some of the companies that have come through, or the initiatives that have taken place in here to sort of help with that kind of aspect in life sciences.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those conversations where people think that there is this really sort of, what am I trying to say? Often I think when people are like, well, how do you do it? It's like, well, you just do it. Like, you just bring more people around the table. You widen your aperture for who you think should be allowed in these rooms and who you think should be getting funded, or who you think should be starting companies. So, again, when I was first offered this role, I think one of the reasons I was hesitant to fully step into it was because I didn't know that much about venture capital, but what I did know of it and who I knew in it, I was just like, I'm good.
Yeah.
But again, when I started working at SOSV and the IndieBio team, I felt like there was a space for me to not just say what I needed to say, but actually have it be heard. And so I do think that there is almost this, and I might be actually backtracking what I'm saying, of like you just do it. You just kind of bring people into the room, but it isn't that easy or that simple. But I do think that, at least here in New York, being kind of this melting pot and one of the most diverse cities
100%.
Anywhere, I think the diversity bit, and I'll speak to it tomorrow, I think is there, and I do think now we are working on kind of the equity and inclusion piece, because I think the other thing that sort of gets flattened in these conversations is people think like, well, if you have a diverse community, if you have a diverse network, if you have a diverse pool of applicants, then you automatically have equity and inclusion as part of that. And I think that people fail to realize that you have to work not only at bringing in a diverse group, but then also work at making sure that that community feels inclusive.
100%.
And so in New York, one of the things that I've been really proud to be a part of is this organization called the Venture Access Alliance. I think they've started 2 or 3 years ago. I should know that because I was at one of the first meetings that they had. But the idea was, okay, well, at least in the venture capital ecosystem, how can we be making more people aware of who the funds are, what they're investing in, but then also like what are their best practices, and how can we learn from each other? And so I think it's an initiative and an organization that has really worked to highlight the diverse funds that we have, the diverse firms that we have, how we can be doing more. But I think it is, and something that I'll touch on tomorrow, is it's not a static thing.
No.
Right? Like, community is an ever evolving entity, and you need to make sure that you're taking care of it, you're keeping an eye on it, that you're listening to everyone's voices. And I think the Venture Access Alliance is a really good example of, like I said before, an initiative that didn't exist before, but is something that at all levels, everyone is realizing, okay, we have to come together, we can't do this in isolation, and again, we have to be sharing best practices, putting those practices to use, seeing what's working for us, and kind of reiterating.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you said listening to the communities as well. Where, again, in another conversation I had, we were sort of talking about the same thing, and sort of, companies putting DE&I policies in place and still not listening to the communities those policies are in place to empower. I think that's so important that those voices are heard, and that the impact we make is there to benefit them, right?
Absolutely, and I think it really just comes back to and again, I'm a scientist, but okay, so diversity can often be measured in a very quantitative way. Right, you can say I have 100 people in this organization or 50 people. I'm, looking at gender. I'm looking at, socioeconomic status. I'm looking at, kind of where educational backgrounds. Okay, so you can say this. The way we define diversity is this is a diverse community. But then, are you actually going in there and asking the folks, do you feel heard? Are you feeling included? What is happening when there's conflict? And I think that, though that's a bit of a trickier thing to measure. I know that there are folks working on that, because I think the other thing that happens is, people don't want to, or it can be hard, again, at the highest levels, to change something if you can't show numbers around it.
100%.
Okay, but it's like, how do you measure feelings? How do you measure, and I remember a conversation I had a really long time ago about this, about, okay, well, what would the metric for inclusivity look like? And someone said retention. And I was like, yeah, that might be one, but people stay at jobs that they don't like for any number of reasons. And so while that might be one aspect of it, there is still this need to really, kind of check in with, the people that you're hiring, are they happy? Or, again, I know folks are working on figuring out what that metric might look like.
Yeah.
But I just still believe that if you have a diverse community, does not necessarily mean you have an inclusive one. And I worry that oftentimes with all these reports, everyone's like, look, it's diverse. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, what next?
What does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
In theory. I would love to sort of look forward at what the next sort of 5, 10, 20, 15, however many years looks like here at IndieBio. What are the sort of key goals and aspirations do you sort of look at when we're thinking towards the future? Which is a huge question, I know, but...
The future, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the future, both for SOSV and IndieBio, but hopefully, biotech entrepreneurship at large, will look to be even more diverse, even more inclusive, even more people thinking like, I can use biology and engineering to start a company, that there is funding out there for me, that there are hires out there for me, that the things that I, am building will have meaningful impact. A conversation, this was maybe a year or so ago now, I was having with another VC, and they said to me something along the lines of, oh, if I look across the portfolio of SOSV companies, it is diverse. There are a lot of female founders. And they were specifically speaking about the female founders, and I can't remember the exact question, but it was something along the lines of, what's the goal?
Yeah.
How many female founders do you want to have? And the question took me back a little bit because, and again, like I said, I can't remember if that was the exact question, but I remember my answer being there is no limit, more.
Yeah.
Whatever the number we have now is good, but we need more. And so I think that is also a thing I'm trying to make sure I have visibility on as well. Are we casting a wide enough net to make sure that our applicant pool, is big enough, that the companies I am looking at are diverse enough, not just in founding teams, but in geographical locations and the kinds of problems that they are trying to solve.
Yeah.
Because it is true that good ideas and good companies can come from anywhere, and I do think venture capital, while the face of who gets to allocate money is changing, there are still blind spots, right? I think we all still have our kind of own biases about where we want to look for companies or the kinds of problems that we want to look at. And so I think for me, one of the things that at least has been said to me is it is helpful, to have more Black and brown people around the table. It is helpful to have more non-white individuals who are the decision makers, who are really saying like, no, this is an actual, even though it's not a problem for you specifically, like this is a big problem, that this is a problem that can make a return to the fund.
Yeah.
What I would love to see more of, not just in the venture capital space, but just in the funding space more broadly, is more creative mechanisms to fund early stage companies. I think that given everything that's going on with our government right now, given that there are reductions and cuts to scientific funding, which I don't love, I think that we as a society are going to have to be more creative and use our imaginations to really think about how to get some of these tools and technologies that are really needed, really like out of the lab and actually into the world where they're needed.
Yeah, amazing. I always like to end these conversations with a piece of advice, and I guess we could speak to many people in different aspects, but if someone is sort of like, entering that early stage funding for their company, what do you think are some key pieces of advice, or a key piece of advice for them to sort of keep in mind when they begin that journey?
Well, I think one of the things, and okay, so like if I'm looking at this from a purely like venture capital standpoint, one of the things that I have found that if folks are more technical minded, that they forget to connect the dots to when they're thinking about is the question of, is this technology a business, or is this technology really interesting?
Yeah.
Two things can be true. But often, when we get pitched companies, especially again from folks who maybe are coming right out of a lab, they'll really, and don't get me wrong, love going deep on the science, want to do that. But I also want to understand, well, what is the actual product? Who actually pays for this? How are they going to pay for that? How are you going to get, this product in front of someone so that they can then ultimately give you money? Or who is that person, that's going to do that? And so I think early on when we're in discussions with companies, it should be quite clear that, and I mean, when I say quite clear, I mean understanding that there's still some optimizations and validations that need to happen, with the science or technology at large. But like, is this actually solving a real problem, a big enough problem? But then how are you actually going to build a company around it? Like, how are you actually going to be a big company? And I think, because a lot of times, and I include myself in this, right? When you're a scientist, you're at the bench, you're in a lab. Your world can often be just in a petri dish, And so it's really encouraging folks to think bigger, than the thing that they actually have, because that's what we need them to do. So if I would say that if I was, kind of on the venture side. But if, like I was saying before, a lot of my, the decisions that I made about my both personal and professional life really did feel like I was just taking big bets on myself.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, moving to New York, going to grad school, when someone offered me the job to build a master's program, I was like, what, me? Which is the exact same, a response I had when someone was like, hi, maybe you would be a good fit for, this fund that supports early stage founders. Me? And yeah, me. So I think, I think more on the kind of personal side of just really kind of like betting on yourself and believing, that you can do the hard thing, but that you'll get feedback about the thing that you're doing. You'll take that feedback and you'll make, different decisions moving forward.
Amazing. I just want to say a huge thank you for joining me.
Oh yeah, no
and
problem.
And also for hosting us
Yeah,
as well.
I'm really excited to have everyone in our office tomorrow. Really excited for some of the talks, excited to meet new faces.
Yeah, it's really cool for us as we sort of like build out our community at Meet, Hannah has got the number 675,000-ish people strong, and sort of, you know, taking a step back from that number and sort of just being like, what do you guys want to hear? What are the things that you want us to address, you know, with our platform is amazing, and the fact that you've very kindly given us your space to host is amazing.
Honestly, when we were first chatting and you were saying you were looking at all these other offices and spaces, and I was like, we got one here, I think it's set up perfectly. And as I was saying at the very beginning, this is really, when this space was built, you know, wanting it to be this hub of these kinds of conversations, these kinds of meetings. So, you know, maybe to go back to a question you had about what does it look like, you know, 5 years from now. I hope that this space is still up and running. I hope people still think of SOSV and IndieBio as the kind of first stop on their entrepreneurial journey. And I'm already like replaying some of the answers in my head, and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have said that, or I should have said that. So always happy to come back, and
100%.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much for joining us again, guys. Join us next month, which is very, very crazy, because that's probably going to be November time, as we roll into Q4 and beginning of 2026, which I have no idea how we've got. no idea how we've got there.
One day at a time.
One day at a time, yeah. Please join us over the next couple of weeks as we sort of release more content following the event. We're looking forward to seeing you all there tomorrow. Yeah, just thank you so much. It's been sort of a whirlwind of emotions and lack of sleep and running around, but to finally be able to say that we're doing this tomorrow is massive, and to be doing it in New York in a biotech hub such as IndieBio is amazing. So thank you to you guys. Thank you to IndieBio.
Anytime.
We're looking forward to seeing you guys tomorrow, so we'll see you then. Thank you and goodbye.